Tempest in Teyvat, Rimuru's Elemental Odyssey by KabirSingh808. Fate's looming threads. The golden sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over Tenshukaku as Ether, Paimon, and Rimuru stood near the grand entrance. The air carried the faint scent of sakura petals, drifting from the trees surrounding the palace grounds. The three travelers faced Raiden A, who stood tall, her violet gaze steady as she spoke. "I hope your travels ahead will be smooth," Ace said, her voice calm yet resolute. Then, shifting her gaze to Ether, she continued, "And I hope you find your sister soon." Ether, hearing her words, felt a flicker of determination light within him. He clenched his fist slightly and gave a firm nod. "Thank you," he said sincerely. A gave him a small nod in return before directing her attention to Rimuru. "I will wait for our next match," she added, her expression remaining composed, but there was a hint of anticipation in her voice. Ether's sweat dropped at that, recalling their previous duel. His body still remembered the weight of her blade, and he wasn't particularly eager to experience that again anytime soon. Well, me too," he said, though his voice lacked enthusiasm. Rimuru chuckled at Ether's reaction before turning his attention to Yae Miko, who stood beside A, watching the scene with amusement. "So, I'm leaving my work in your hands," Rimuru said, his gaze steady. Yae Miko placed a hand on her hip and gave him a sly smile. "Oh, don't worry, little one. I will make sure your work becomes very popular," she said, her tone dripping with mischief. Rimuru sighed, knowing full well that Yae's way of promoting things could be unique. Still, he trusted her skills, so he simply nodded. "I'll count on you, then." With the farewells almost done, he glanced toward A again, and she asked, "Did you meet everyone else?" Paimon quickly chimed in, floating beside Ether. "Yep, we did. We made sure to say our goodbyes to everyone before coming here." "Very well, then," A replied, her gaze lingering on them one last time before she stepped back. Ether and Paimon then each placed a hand on Rimuru's arms, their bodies glowing as they activated their teleportation. The surroundings blurred in a flash of light, and in the next instant, they found themselves standing in the bustling heart of Liu Harbor. The transition from Inazuma's serene palace to Liu's lively atmosphere was immediate. The sounds of merchants calling out their wares, ships docking at the harbor, and the chatter of townspeople filled the air. The aroma of freshly cooked street food wafted through the streets, instantly making Paimon's stomach growl. Rimuru took a deep breath, taking in the familiar scent of Liu's harbor. Turning to the other two, he said, "Well, looks like our journey in Inazuma has come to an end." Ether, gazing at the familiar cityscape, nodded slowly. "Yeah, but everything comes to an end someday," he said, his voice thoughtful. Rimuru smiled at his words. "True, but every end is just the start of a new journey." Paimon, breaking the moment with her usual enthusiasm, floated ahead. "Well, before we start getting all philosophical, let's go take the Chasm Commission already. We have work to do." Rimuru and Ether chuckled as they followed her, making their way toward the Adventurers Guild. The next phase of their journey was about to begin. Standing before Catherine, the ever-reliable receptionist of the Adventurers Guild, Ether, Rimuru, and Paimon listened intently as she detailed their new commission. Paimon, always eager, leaned forward. "Hey, Catherine, we're here to take the Chasm Commission," she chirped. Catherine, as usual, maintained her calm, professional demeanor but gave a small smile as she acknowledged them. "Ah, Paimon, Traveler, and Sir Rimuru. Please wait a moment," she said before reaching below her desk to retrieve a document. Handing it to them, she continued, "This is the commission request. The miners working near the chasm have reported strange occurrences. They've seen multiple hilichurls moving deep into the mines. What's particularly odd is that these hilichurls appear to have a clear sense of direction. Instead of attacking people or wandering aimlessly as they usually do, they are marching deeper inside as if being led somewhere. Even when encountering humans, they completely ignore them, showing no aggression whatsoever." Ether furrowed his brows at that, and Paimon tapped her chin. That is weird. Hilichurls usually attack on sight, don't they?" Rimuru crossed his arms in thought. "If they're moving with purpose, it means there's something deeper in the chasm that's drawing them in. Whether that's a natural phenomenon or something more sinister, we won't know until we check it out ourselves." Both Ether and Paimon nodded in agreement. We'll take the commission, Catharin, Paimon confirmed. Catharin nodded approvingly. It's good that you three accepted it. Given the dangers of the chasm, I didn't want to send inexperienced adventurers. However, even for you, I advise caution. The chasm is known for its unstable terrain and unpredictable anomalies. Please be careful. Ether gave a reassuring nod. We'll keep that in mind. Catharin smiled. Then I'll leave it in your hands. Good luck, esteemed adventurers. With their mission accepted, the trio left the adventurers' guild and walked toward an open area in Liu Harbor. Rimuru held out his hand, and Ether and Paimon placed theirs over his. In an instant, their bodies glowed with a faint blue light, and within seconds, they disappeared, teleporting directly to their destination. A burst of light flashed in the barren, rocky landscape of the chasm, and within moments, Rimuru, Ether, and Paimon stood at the very edge, overlooking the vast, craggy abyss. The air was thick with dust, and the remnants of old mining operations lay scattered around: wooden planks, rusted mine carts, and broken lanterns. Despite the bright afternoon sun, the chasm still held an eerie presence, as though something ancient slumbered beneath its depths. Paimon pulled out the commission paper Catharin had given them and began reading. All right, let's see. This request comes from a miner named Yuehui. Ether and Rimuru both nodded and glanced around, quickly spotting a group of miners working near an excavation site. The workers seemed busy, shoveling dirt, moving supplies, and monitoring mining equipment. However, in the middle of the operation stood a middle-aged man, seemingly overseeing the workers with a careful eye. The three approached him, and Rimuru stepped forward, his tone polite yet firm. Excuse me, are you Yuehui? The man immediately turned toward them, his face lighting up with relief. Ah, yes, I am Yuehui. Rimuru nodded. We were sent by the Adventurers Guild to investigate the situation you reported. Upon hearing that, Yuehui exhaled deeply, his shoulders visibly relaxing. Oh, thank the Archons. I've been so worried about this situation, and I was hoping the Guild would send someone capable. Ether took a step forward. We've already been briefed about the strange hilichurl movements. They're all heading deeper into the chasm, correct? Yuehui nodded quickly. Yes, exactly. And what's even stranger is that they don't attack us at all. Even when our workers accidentally get too close, the hilichurls just keep walking, as if we don't even exist. That's what's been worrying me the most. It's just unnatural. Rimuru tapped his chin, processing the information. That is odd. Usually, hilichurls are territorial and attack anything that enters their space. For them to completely ignore you means that something is overriding their instincts. Yuehui nodded. That's what I thought. And honestly, I don't want to take any risks. I've told all my workers to stay away from the deeper tunnels until we understand what's going on. Rimuru placed a reassuring hand on Yuehui's shoulder. That's a wise decision. Keep your workers away for now. We'll take care of the investigation. Yuehui sighed in relief. Thank you. I'll leave this in your hands. With that, the trio stepped away from the miners, moving to a more secluded area. Ether glanced at Rimuru and asked, So, what's the plan? Rimuru crossed his arms. First, we should investigate the surface area for any clues. There might be traces of energy or patterns in the hilichurl's movements that could tell us where they're going and why. He then turned toward the vast rocky cliffs on the other side of the site. I'll take the opposite side and check for anything unusual. You and Paimon investigate this area. Ether nodded in understanding. Sounds like a good plan. Paimon, floating beside them, pumped her tiny fists. All right, let's get to work, then. With that, Rimuru's wings spread open, his azure-colored energy flaring to life as he soared into the sky, gliding toward the far end of the chasm. His keen eyes scanned the rocky formations below as he searched for anything out of place. Meanwhile, Ether and Paimon stayed behind, carefully observing the ground for any signs of disturbance. The two of them began exploring the surface step by step, searching for clues that could explain the hilichurl's strange behavior. As Rimuru landed on the other side of the chasm, his sharp eyes scanned the surroundings. Towering rock formations stood in contrast to the dense forest beyond, where Sumeru, the land of wisdom, awaited. The territory of the Dendro Archon. Standing at the edge of the cliff, Rimuru gazed toward the distant greenery. He sighed, knowing that their next destination lay just beyond these walls. But before they could move forward, the mysteries of the chasm needed to be unraveled. His mind drifted to Ivaraj, the enigmatic figure whose presence in this world remained elusive. Perhaps the depths of the chasm hold some answers. With that thought, Rimuru turned on his heel and began his investigation. He combed through the rugged terrain, his keen senses picking up the faint traces of elemental energy left behind by the migrating hilichurls. However, no clear pattern emerged. Instead, he found nothing but scattered treasure chests and treasure hoarders, the latter of which he swiftly dealt with before continuing his search. His footsteps eventually led him toward a hidden cave entrance. The tunnel stretched into darkness, its rocky walls damp with underground moisture. A faint, almost imperceptible energy pulsed from within, drawing his curiosity. Where does this cave lead? Rimuru wondered, stepping forward cautiously. It seems to extend toward Sumeru, but something feels off. Determined to ensure there were no underlying dangers, he entered. The deeper he went, the more the atmosphere changed. A strange sensation crawled up his spine, an unnatural shift in reality itself. Then, crack, his surroundings fractured like glass, shimmering pieces of reality falling apart. The tunnel, the damp stone walls, and even the air itself shattered into 1,000 pieces, revealing a new world beyond. Rimuru's eyes widened in shock. He now stood before a colossal, radiant tree. Its massive branches stretched toward an endless sky, covered in glowing silver-white leaves. The tree pulsed with immense elemental power, its very existence exuding a sense of ancient wisdom and sorrow. The mere sight of it sent a thrill down his spine. "Seal," he called out, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might disrupt the solemn majesty of the scene before him. "I am here, Master." Hearing her voice grounded him, a breath of relief escaping his lips. He had half expected the strange phenomena to sever their connection, but the fact that she could still respond meant he was not entirely lost. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" Rimuru asked, his eyes never leaving the towering entity before him. "Yes, there is no doubt about it. This is Irminsul, the very heart of Teyvat's memories." The confirmation sent a surge of excitement through Rimuru, his golden eyes gleaming with an intensity that only grew stronger as he took a step closer to the sacred tree. He had read many accounts about this world, gathered knowledge from scholars, adventurers, and even Ciel's own analysis, yet never had he expected to find himself standing before the source of all knowledge, the very foundation of this realm's history. "Now this is getting interesting," he muttered under his breath, his lips curving into a small smirk as he prepared to delve deeper into whatever mystery had brought him here. However, before he could take another step, a voice, soft yet filled with an indescribable sorrow, whispered through the air. "World, forget me." Rimuru immediately halted, his expression shifting into one of deep contemplation as he processed those words. The voice had not belonged to Ciel, nor had it sounded like a mere echo of the past. It was as if someone, somewhere, was desperately pleading for the world itself to erase their existence. "Ciel, did you hear that?" "Yes, Master." That same phrase. That same sorrowful whisper. It was as if the very essence of the tree was speaking directly to him, urging him to uncover the truth hidden within its roots. He moved forward, determined to find the source of this mysterious plea, but before he could even blink, the world shattered once more. A sudden, violent shift overtook his surroundings, the green landscape fracturing apart like brittle glass as a new reality forcefully took its place. As his vision cleared, Rimuru found himself standing in a completely different place. Gone was the infinite meadow surrounding Irminsul, replaced by the dense, towering trees of an ancient forest. The air was heavy with the scent of blooming flowers and damp earth, and the sound of rustling leaves filled the silence. It felt peaceful, yet at the same time, eerily abandoned. Before he could take in more details, his gaze caught movement up ahead. A small figure, a child, was walking deeper into the forest, their steps unhurried, yet strangely purposeful. A child. Rimuru narrowed his eyes, his instincts immediately sharpening. "What is a child doing here?" "Master, I advise caution." Ciel's tone carried an uncharacteristic weight to it, and Rimuru instinctively reached for his katana, his fingers tightening around the hilt as he followed the child into the woods. Something about this entire situation felt unnatural, as if he were trespassing within the forgotten pages of a story lost to time. The child's small figure eventually disappeared into a cave hidden beneath the roots of a massive tree, its entrance shrouded in a dim, almost mystical glow. Without hesitation, Rimuru stepped inside, his every sense on high alert. The cave itself was not particularly large, but what lay at its center made Rimuru stop in his track. There, resting atop an ancient stone bed covered in soft leaves, was a woman. She was asleep, her breathing slow, steady, almost serene. Her long, flowing robes of green and blue blended harmoniously with the nature around her, her wide sleeves cascading like rippling water. A delicate belt wrapped around her waist, accentuating the natural elegance of her form, while a headdress adorned with intricate floral motifs crowned her head like a symbol of divine grace. But what captured Rimuru's attention the most? Her ears. Long, pointed, undeniably those of an elf. In that moment, Rimuru felt his entire world come to a halt. She was, without a doubt, the most breathtaking being he had ever laid eyes on. There was something almost surreal about her beauty, something that transcended mere mortal charm. She was otherworldly, as if she belonged to a realm untouched by the impurities of time. If he still possessed his human physiology, his heart would have been pounding mercilessly in his chest, his face would have been flushed with embarrassment at how utterly entranced he had become. What is this felling? A loud cough echoed in his mind. Seal. Master. He immediately flinched, his mind snapping back to reality as he hurriedly raised his hands in defense. Wait. It's not what you think. Seal didn't respond, but Rimuru could feel it, she was angry. Clearing his throat, he awkwardly shifted his focus back to the sleeping woman, his mind still racing from the realization that he had completely lost himself in her presence. This was not just an ordinary elf. No, this was the greater Lord Rukkhadevata, the first Dendro Archon, the god of Dendro in Teyvat. Before he could process the gravity of his discovery, her lips parted slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. World, forget me. Abyssal energy suddenly erupted around her. Rimuru barely had time to react before the world around him began to collapse once more, shattering like fragile glass. As the reality crumbled, his eyes locked onto hers just as she started to wake up for the briefest of moments. Emerald green, deep, endless, and filled with emotions he couldn't yet understand. How did you get here? She whispered. Then, he ran towards her to save her, but before he could reach her, everything faded to white. A heavy silence filled the cave as Rimuru found himself standing at the exact spot where his strange journey had begun, his golden eyes scanning the dimly lit surroundings with cautious curiosity. The cold, damp air of the underground cavern had replaced the warmth of the vibrant green world he had just witnessed, the echoes of distant water droplets the only sound breaking the stillness. Despite knowing he had returned to reality, his mind remained entangled in the surreal experience he had just undergone. He took a deep breath, running a hand through his azure hair as he slowly turned on his heel, searching for any remnants of what he had just witnessed. Was it all just an illusion? He thought, his sharp eyes flickering across the stone walls, half expecting to find a trace of the radiant tree or the mysterious sleeping woman from before. But the cave was just as it had been before, empty, devoid of any hints of the extraordinary vision he had encountered. Letting out a sigh, Rimuru knew that lingering here would yield nothing. With a slow shake of his head, he turned around and began making his way toward the cave's exit. And yet, she remained in his mind. That serene expression, those emerald eyes, the delicate floral headdress adorning her head. The way her long, flowing robes seemed to merge with nature itself. Everything about her was enthralling, captivating, utterly otherworldly. The realization hit him harder than he expected. Damn it, I'm still thinking about her. A knowing voice suddenly spoke in his mind. Master, you are still thinking about her, aren't you? Rimuru froze mid-step. A single imaginary bead of sweat formed on his head, as though his subconscious had created it out of sheer guilt. Oh, of course not, he replied a little too quickly, his tone noticeably awkward. Seal remained silent for a moment, clearly not convinced. Rimuru, desperate to steer the conversation away from his completely not love-struck thoughts, immediately changed the subject. Anyway, I'm more curious about that place. What exactly was that? And more importantly, he narrowed his eyes, recalling the unmistakable presence of dendro energy that had surrounded the mysterious woman. From what I saw in that cave, she was most likely the greater Lord Rukkhadevata. Seal responded without hesitation. Indeed, Master. While Mondstadt's library lacks any visual representation of her, the sheer concentration of dendro energy surrounding her, combined with her divine presence, leaves little room for doubt. That woman was undoubtedly Greater Lord Rukkhadevata. Hearing Ciel's confirmation made Rimuru pause for a moment. The name Greater Lord Rukkhadevata was one he had encountered in various books and stories, often spoken with reverence by scholars and historians alike. She was the original Dendro Archon, the god of wisdom, and the once beloved deity of Sumeru. And yet, the very thought of that left a strange feeling in Rimuru's chest. He had only just glimpsed a fragment of her existence, but something about it didn't sit right with him. To think, the world lost a goddess like her, he muttered to himself. Then, almost absent-mindedly, he added. But still, I never thought she'd be this beautiful, though. The moment those words left his lips, Ciel's entire system seemed to glitch for a fraction of a second. Opening square bracket quote closing square bracket. Silence. A dangerous silence. Then, Rimuru, as if suddenly hit by inspiration, perked up as an idea formed in his head. Hey, Ciel, did you happen to save her image? For a brief moment, there was another eerie silence, before Ciel's mechanical voice suddenly responded, lacking any of her usual warmth. I do not possess such a function. Rimuru narrowed his eyes suspiciously. Liar. Opening square bracket quote closing square bracket. I know you're lying. Just like that time I asked you to take a picture of Hinata at that noble party. Ciel refused to respond. Gotcha. Realizing that he had caught her red-handed, Rimuru chuckled to himself before stretching his arms behind his head. Well, whatever. He let out a soft sigh, his expression softening as his thoughts drifted back to the mysterious goddess. Still, I knew we will meet again soon. Unbeknownst to him, inside his personal subspace, Ciel was furiously venting her emotions in the most unexpected way possible. Clad in her usual astral blue dress, the sentient voice of wisdom was currently sitting on the floor, clutching a massive pillow, her delicate hands repeatedly punching it with relentless frustration. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Her ethereal form shimmered slightly as she continued her merciless assault on the innocent pillow, her face uncharacteristically flushed with irritation. Master, you idiot. Standing off to the side, Ojal and Basht, the two former overlords of the sea who now resided within Rimuru's domain, stood completely frozen, their bodies tensed as they observed the scene before them. The great Ojal, the once feared Leviathan who had threatened Liu itself, was currently holding back a nervous gulp. Basht, his devoted consort, was no better. They had both witnessed wars, divine battles, and catastrophic disasters, and yet, nothing had ever prepared them for the sight of Ciel violently punching a pillow in jealousy-fueled rage. Ojal leaned toward Basht and whispered in a hushed tone. We are doomed. Basht nodded solemnly. Yes, Rimuru's stupidity has doomed us all. As Ciel continued to release her pent-up emotions on the defenseless pillow, the two serpents could only pray that they wouldn't become the next targets of her wrath. The cool, fresh air of the outside world greeted Rimuru as he emerged from the cave, the contrast between this open landscape and the illusionary world he had just witnessed making his mind feel momentarily disoriented. The sky above stretched endlessly, the fading sunlight casting golden hues across the rugged terrain of the chasm. Taking a deep breath, Rimuru unfurled his wings, the brilliant azure energy shimmering as they extended, their translucent form reflecting the ambient light around them. With a single, powerful motion, he propelled himself into the air, his body slicing through the wind as he flew towards the location where he had last left Ether and Paimon. From above, he quickly spotted them engaged in conversation with a group of miners, their expressions serious as they listened intently to whatever information was being shared. His golden eyes flickered with interest, perhaps they had managed to gather some useful details. Descending smoothly, Rimuru landed a short distance away, causing Ether and Paimon to glance in his direction. Upon noticing him, they excused themselves from the miners and began making their way toward him, their expressions a mix of curiosity and expectation. So, did you find anything? Rimuru asked the moment they regrouped. Ether sighed and shook his head. No, nothing out of the ordinary. The miners all say the same thing. They've seen hilichurls enter the deeper tunnels, but none have ever come back out. Hearing this, Rimuru crossed his arms and nodded thoughtfully. That matches up with what I found. I didn't uncover anything unusual outside the cave, either. As he spoke, He recalled the otherworldly vision he had just witnessed, his thoughts lingering once more on the mysterious, sleeping woman. Deciding that his companions should know, he began recounting everything that had transpired within the illusionary world: the Irminsul tree, the child wandering into the forest, and, most importantly, the mysterious elven woman who radiated an immense presence of dendro energy. Ether and Paimon listened attentively, their expressions shifting between curiosity, confusion, and eventual shock as Rimuru painted the full picture of what he had experienced. When he finally concluded his story, Ether was the first to break the silence. "And you think that she was Greater Lord Rukkhadevata?" Rimuru firmly nodded. Paimon, however, furrowed her brows in confusion. "But wait a second, didn't she, die 500 years ago?" Once again, Rimuru nodded in agreement, his expression remaining serious. "Yes, she did. But," he paused, his gaze drifting slightly downward as he carefully chose his words. "Based on what I sensed about her, I don't think she's completely gone. I believe she died physically, but her consciousness still remained intact." Ether's eyes widened slightly at the implication. "Wait, are you saying that she left behind some kind of message, like what Makoto did in Inazuma?" Rimuru raised a brow, intrigued by the comparison. "That's not entirely wrong. But there's a difference." Paimon tilted her head. What do you mean?" Rimuru exhaled slowly before explaining. "Makoto only left behind a small fragment of her consciousness, barely enough to deliver a single message through the sacred Sakura tree. But this..." His gaze darkened slightly, his voice laced with certainty. "This is different. Her consciousness isn't just lingering, it's still active and complete." Paimon gasped audibly, covering her mouth with both hands as her mind pieced together the implications of what he had just said. Wait, are you trying to say that?" Rimuru gave a small, knowing smile. "Yes, you figured it out. If she's still there, that means we can still save her." The weight of those words hung heavily in the air, their meaning sinking into Ether and Paimon's minds. Their eyes widened in astonishment, the realization dawning on them like a sudden burst of light in the darkness. "Then why aren't we doing that first?" Ether asked urgently, his golden eyes burning with determination. Paimon nodded rapidly, flailing her arms. "Yeah, why are we standing around here when we could be saving a literal god?" Rimuru raised a hand, signaling them to slow down. "For starters, we don't even know where she is right now. Sure, we could go to Sumeru, but even if we did, we wouldn't know where to look." He then crossed his arms, his expression becoming thoughtful. "However, based on what I experienced inside that illusion, I have a strong suspicion that she's somewhere near Irminsul." Ether's gaze sharpened. "Or, maybe even inside it." Rimuru met his gaze and nodded. "Exactly." For a moment, silence settled between them as they processed the situation. Then, "Well, what are we waiting for?" Paimon declared, placing her hands on her hips and puffing out her chest. "Let's get this chasm problem over with so we can go to Sumeru and save Greater Lord Rukkhadevata." Ether and Rimuru exchanged a glance before both of them smiled in agreement. Right. With their resolve strengthened and their goal clear, the three of them turned toward the deeper parts of the chasm, ready to uncover its mysteries and put an end to whatever lurked beneath. As Rimuru stood at the edge of the chasm, he extended his hand, forming a series of shimmering blue spheres. Within moments, these spheres burst, transforming into several water clones of himself, each identical in appearance but slightly translucent, their forms rippling like liquid under the dim glow of the cavern's crystals. Without hesitation, the clones dove into the depths of the chasm, spreading out in different directions to investigate the mysterious disappearances of the hilichurls. Turning back to Ether and Paimon, Rimuru exhaled lightly before speaking. "We should wait here until my clones discover where exactly these hilichurls are heading." His voice was calm yet firm, and both Ether and Paimon nodded in agreement, taking seats on a nearby cart and some scattered stones. As they settled into the silence of waiting, Paimon suddenly turned toward Rimuru with a curious expression. "Hey, Rimuru, I've been wondering. How exactly do you plan on saving Greater Lord Rukkhadevata?" Rimuru closed his eyes for a moment, tapping his chin thoughtfully before answering. "Well, it's actually quite simple, at least for me." He opened his eyes and continued, "The first step is reaching Irminsul, the place where her consciousness is currently trapped. Once I get there, I can use my ability to transform into my slime form and directly consume her consciousness. Ether listened attentively before interjecting, but wouldn't that mean you'd be absorbing her? How does that help her? Rimuru shook his head with a small chuckle. Not quite. You see, consuming doesn't always mean erasing. My ability allows me to store and preserve things inside me without destroying them like Ojal and Basht. In this case, I won't be assimilating her into myself like I would with an enemy. Instead, I'll be keeping her safe, preventing her from being fully erased by Irminsul's memory-wiping properties. Paimon tilted her head in thought. That makes sense, but wait, didn't she also get corrupted by the abyss? Wouldn't that mean you'll be taking in that corruption too? Rimuru smirked, already expecting this concern. Exactly, and that's where Azathoth comes into play. He placed a hand on his chest. The moment I consume her consciousness, Azathoth will automatically begin devouring the abyssal corruption that has infected her. It'll work like a purification process, burning away all traces of the abyss's influence while keeping her soul intact. Ether's eyes widened at this explanation. So you'll be purifying her while keeping her essence safe, and then what? How do you bring her back? Rimuru's expression turned a little mischievous as he casually stated, simple. After the purification is complete, I'll transfer her consciousness into one of the spare bodies I have inside me. Paimon immediately recoiled, her face paling. Wait. You have bodies inside you. What are you, some kind of creepy corpse collector? Rimuru blinked before laughing. No, it's nothing like that. I meant artificial bodies, like Shogun puppets, but more advanced. Ether furrowed his brows. Why do you even have those? Rimuru crossed his arms, leaning back slightly. In my world, demons can't manifest properly in the material world without a physical vessel. If they stay for too long, their existence destabilizes. So, I created artificial bodies that they can inhabit, allowing them to exist freely without restrictions. Paimon still looked uneasy. Demons. So you have demons working under you. Rimuru chuckled at her reaction. Yes, but don't worry. Just because they're demons doesn't mean they're evil. They have their own rules and loyalties. They only follow those they deem worthy to serve, and I happen to be one of those people. None of them would harm anyone without my permission. Paimon let out a breath of relief. Well, that's a little reassuring, I guess. Ether, however, had another question on his mind. If you can do this, then, why didn't you save Makoto? At this, Rimuru's expression turned slightly serious. It's not that I didn't want to. He sighed. The problem was that Makoto's consciousness wasn't complete. It was only a fragment, barely enough to leave a message for A. Even if I had tried to save her the same way I planned to save Rukkhadevata, her consciousness wouldn't have lasted long before fading away completely. Ether nodded slowly, understanding the difference. However, a new realization suddenly struck him, and his expression darkened. Wait a minute, you said Azathoth will consume the abyssal corruption in Rukkhadevata's consciousness, but doesn't that mean? Before he could finish, Paimon gasped in horror, realizing the same thing. Wait. Doesn't that mean you'll be feeding Azathoth? What if that gives him enough strength to break out of the seal? For a moment, there was silence. Then, Rimuru smiled reassuringly. You don't have to worry about that. He raised a hand and pointed to himself. Remember when I lost control and fought A? Both Ether and Paimon flinched, recalling the terrifying battle. Rimuru continued, at that time, a significant amount of Azathoth's power leaked out, which actually created enough space in the seal for me to safely consume Rukkhadevata's corruption without any risk of him breaking free. Ether and Paimon both sighed in relief, glad to hear that there wasn't an immediate danger of Azathoth escaping. Still, Rimuru stared off into the distance, his expression unreadable. But I still wonder, just how powerful is he, really? Paimon looked at him cautiously. You mean Azathoth? Rimuru nodded. Yeah, even though the power that leaked out back then wasn't even the smallest portion of what he truly possesses, it was still more than enough to nearly destroy everything around me. The fact that such a small leak was enough to create space for me to fully consume Rukkhadevata's corruption. He paused. It just makes me realize that his true power is beyond anything I can even comprehend. Ether swallowed. So even you don't know how strong he really is? Rimuru shook his head. No. But do you remember what he said when you fought him? Ether thought back to his battle against Azathoth, recalling the ominous words the entity had spoken. There is someone, keeping me weak. Paimon's eyes widened. Oh yeah, he said there's someone actually making him weaker, stopping him from breaking free. Rimuru nodded. And honestly, I'm grateful for that. Whoever they are, they're the only thing stopping Azathoth from completely destroying everything. Paimon shivered. But who are they, exactly? Rimuru shook his head. I don't know, but I hope they keep him in check. As their conversation continued, Rimuru suddenly received a mental message from one of his clones. His eyes narrowed slightly as he focused on the information being relayed to him. Ether and Paimon, noticing his sudden silence and serious expression, watched him curiously, waiting for him to speak. After a few moments, Rimuru let out a small sigh before turning to face them. Looks like this chasm is far more interesting than I initially imagined, and quite a bit more dangerous too, he remarked, his voice carrying a hint of intrigue. Hearing this, Paimon tilted her head, her tiny arms crossing over her chest as she asked, What do you mean by that? Rimuru glanced at her before shifting his gaze toward Ether, who was also paying close attention. Some of my clones have encountered areas within the chasm where the flow of time is different. In some places, time moves slower than normal, and in others, it moves much faster. Not only that, but they've also discovered what seem to be pocket dimensions scattered throughout the area, as if reality itself has fractured and formed enclosed spaces outside of normal time and space. Ether's brows furrowed at this revelation, while Paimon visibly shivered, hugging herself as she floated slightly closer to Ether. Wait. Are you saying that time is broken in some parts of the chasm? Just how powerful must someone be to mess with time like that? Rimuru shook his head. No, I don't think it's the work of a person, at least, not anyone currently active in Teyvat. It's more likely that these anomalies have been present for a very long time. I suspect the cause is either linked to Kyanria or an even older civilization, just like the remnants we found buried beneath Dragonspine. At the mention of Dragonspine, Ether's expression darkened slightly as he recalled the secrets hidden within the mountain, the ancient civilization that had perished long before Kyanria's fall, and the strange power that had twisted and frozen the land in eternal ice. If something similar had happened in the chasm, then it meant there was another layer of history that had been erased from the surface world. As the two absorbed Rimuru's words, he suddenly received another piece of information from a different clone. His eyes flashed with realization before he looked back at Ether and Paimon. Looks like my hunch was right, he said, crossing his arms. Celestia was definitely involved in what happened here. Ether's gaze sharpened immediately. What did your clone find? He asked. Rimuru turned to fully face him before explaining. Do you two remember the giant, metallic nail that we found at the summit of Dragonspine? Both Ether and Paimon nodded, recalling the enormous object that had crashed into the mountain, spreading its foreign influence and altering the landscape. It was said to have come from Celestia, though its true purpose remained unknown. Seeing their reactions, Rimuru continued, there's another one, right here in the chasm. Paimon's mouth fell open in shock. How did it even get here? Rimuru shrugged. That's what I want to find out. But if I had to guess, there's a strong possibility that the chasm itself was created as a result of the nail falling, or maybe chasm was created after the nail fell here somehow. In other words, the land wasn't originally like this, something happened after the nail crashed here, something that caused this massive chasm to form. Ether's expression grew somber. If that were true, then it meant Celestia had played a direct role in shaping the chasm, possibly as part of some larger scheme. But for what purpose? What had been buried here before the nail fell? And why had Celestia deemed it necessary to strike this land with such force that it altered its entire geography? As the weight of these implications settled over the group, Rimuru narrowed his eyes. One thing is certain, he said, his tone carrying a sense of finality. The chasm holds more secrets than we thought. And if Celestia was involved, then whatever's hidden here is something they didn't want the world to know. As Rimuru processed the information from his clone, he extended both hands toward Ether and Paimon. Let's go, he said. My clone has pinpointed where the hilichurls are heading. Without hesitation, Ether and Paimon each took one of Rimuru's hands. In an instant, a spatial distortion surrounded them, and before they could react, the scenery shifted. When their vision cleared, they found themselves standing on the edge of a cliff deep within the chasm. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the scent of ancient stone and lingering abyssal energy. The underground cavern stretched vast and far, illuminated by faintly glowing blue crystals embedded in the rocky surfaces. But what caught their attention immediately was the sight before them. Hanging upside down, suspended in midair, was a massive ruined city. Broken buildings, shattered bridges, and crumbling towers defied gravity, their structures eerily mirroring those of old civilizations, but inverted, as if reality itself had flipped them. Paimon's eyes widened, and her mouth hung open. Wah! It's an entire city, upside down. Rimuru, observing the scene with narrowed eyes, nodded. Yes, it is. Ether crossed his arms, his expression contemplative. I certainly wasn't expecting to see something like this. Rimuru hummed in agreement. This confirms my theory, meaning this place is the remnants of an ancient civilization. Ether nodded as well, his mind racing with the implications. That would make sense. But if that's the case, what exactly happened here? Paimon, still staring at the surreal sight, shuddered. And why is it upside down? That's super creepy. Before they could delve deeper into their thoughts, Ether's sharp eyes caught movement below. There are a lot of abyss creatures here, he noted grimly. Rimuru followed his gaze and saw several abyss mages patrolling the ruins, accompanied by shadowy husks and twisted hilichurls. The air around them shimmered with abyssal energy. He exhaled through his nose. Well, that confirms it. Whatever's going on here, the Abyss Order is directly involved. Ether nodded, gripping his sword. Then let's go deeper and find out what they're up to. Just as they were about to move, Rimuru suddenly felt a shift in space behind them. His senses flared in alarm, and he immediately turned around. A swirling portal had opened behind them, rippling like distorted water. Sensing Rimuru's reaction, Ether and Paimon also turned, their bodies tensing. From the dark void of the portal, a lone figure stepped out. Clad in his signature deep blue cloak, his blue eyes glowing in the dim light of the chasm, Dainsleif emerged. Paimon's shock was immediate. Dane, what are you doing here? The man regarded them with his usual calm, unreadable expression. I could ask you the same thing, he replied. Rimuru, studying Dainsleif, spoke first. I assume you're here because of the traces of the Abyss Order. Dainsleif gave a small nod. Indeed, you are correct. Rimuru crossed his arms. Then, did you find out what they're planning? Dainsleif's golden gaze darkened slightly. Yes. From the information I've gathered, the Abyss is attempting to create something. Ether narrowed his eyes. Create what? Dainsleif's next words made their blood run cold. A mechanical god. A being capable of toppling the divine thrones of Celestia. Ether and Paimon's eyes widened in sheer shock. What? Paimon nearly shrieked. A god. But that's... Rimuru, though not as visibly shaken, frowned in thought. A mechanical god, huh? And how exactly are they planning to do that? Dainsleif exhaled slowly before answering. They intend to use the eye of the first field tiller as its core. His gaze flickered toward Ether. You remember the defiled statue we found before, don't you? Ether clenched his jaw and nodded. Yeah, that thing was corrupted beyond saving. Dainsleif continued, the Abyss Order plans to replace the abyssal energy in its hands with the eye of the first field tiller. Then, they intend to merge it with either Dvalin or Ojal, using their immense power as a catalyst. The weight of that revelation crushed the air around them. Paimon nearly fainted. This is way beyond what I can even imagine. Rimuru, arms still crossed, processed the situation. So they're trying to fuse this statue with a legendary creature to birth an artificial god. Dainsleif nodded. Then Dane said, if they succeed, then they'll have a weapon strong enough to challenge the gods of Celestia. Rimuru sighed. I suppose that explains why the Abyss is so focused on finding this eye of the first field tiller. Dainsleif confirmed, yes, and I already found it. Ether immediately turned to him. Then where is it? Dainsleif's expression didn't change. It is safe, under my protection. Paimon eyed him suspiciously. You aren't experimenting on it, are you? Dainsleif met her gaze calmly. You may doubt me if you wish, but I cannot allow something of this magnitude to fall into incapable hands, especially those of nations and gods. Rimuru sighed, shaking his head. You really despise the gods, huh? Dainsleif's voice was cold. There is nothing special about them anyway. And I think you, more than anyone, understand that. Rimuru chuckled slightly. Well, you're not wrong. Dainsleif nodded in acknowledgement. Paimon, however, stared at Rimuru in disbelief. Wait. Rimuru, do you also despise the gods? Rimuru shook his head. No, I don't hate them. But I am just cautious around them. Paimon blinked. Why? Aren't they our friends? Rimuru smirked. Oh, my little Paimon. I'm not saying they're not our friends. But they're still hiding a lot of things from us. Ether frowned. What do you mean? Rimuru leaned slightly toward them. It's simple. Since I can sense when people are lying or hiding things, I can tell when someone is keeping secrets. Let's take Venti, for example. Paimon gasped. Wait, Venti. But, he acts all carefree and silly. Rimuru chuckled. Exactly. He acts like that. But in reality, he's hiding a lot. And from what I can tell, it's directly related to Celestia, and a god. Ether's eyes widened. Wait, you don't mean. Rimuru's expression turned serious. Yes, he's hiding something about the god of time. Dainsleif raised an eyebrow. Interesting. What made you suspect that? Rimuru exhaled. Simple. Even though it's faint, I can still sense some traces and a connection between him and time. Ether and Paimon were stunned. Seeing Ether's troubled expression, Rimuru placed a hand on his shoulder. Don't worry. I don't think Venti has ill intentions. Maybe he has his own circumstances, just like how Morax is bound by contracts. Ether nodded slowly. That makes sense. Paimon pouted. Still, I don't like that they're keeping secrets from us. Rimuru simply smiled. That's why we just have to uncover the truth ourselves. As they continued their discussion, Dainsleif folded his arms and spoke with a serious tone. Before we move further, there is something else I need to tell you, he said, his piercing gaze locking onto Rimuru and Ether. This operation that the Abyss Order is conducting, it is called, Loom of Fate. Hearing this name, Paimon tilted her head in confusion. Loom of Fate, what is that? Some kind of fate-weaving machine? She asked, her small hands making a gesture as if she was weaving something in the air. Rimuru placed a hand on his chin, his expression thoughtful. Highly likely, he mused. Ether, still processing this information, asked, so, you're saying that the Abyss Order is trying to create something that can weave fate? Dainsleif nodded. From what I have gathered, it is one of their most important objectives. Rimuru remained deep in thought, his mind piecing together different fragments of information. After a few moments, he spoke. All right, let's look at this from the beginning. We know that the curse placed upon Kyanria's people was due to their reckless use of abyssal power. It spiraled out of control and became a threat to all of Teyvat. That's when Celestia intervened and brought destruction upon them. Am I correct? Dainsleif nodded, but his expression darkened. That is the truth, though I must emphasize that many people of Kyanria were innocent. Not everyone in the nation was involved in whatever experiments were being conducted. And yet, they were all punished. Rimuru sighed. That's understandable. The guilty and the innocent were all caught in the same catastrophe. He then continued, his tone more analytical. Here's my theory. When the cataclysm happened, the people of Kyanria, whether guilty or innocent, were exposed to abyssal corruption. As you know, Teyvat has the Irminsul tree, which stores the information of every being in this world. That includes their existence, memories, and even their fate. If the souls of the Kyanrians had entered Irminsul while corrupted, it would have spread the abyssal corruption throughout the tree itself. That would have put all of Teyvat at risk. As he spoke, the group listened attentively. Ether and Paimon's eyes widened in realization, while Dainsleif maintained his usual unreadable expression. Rimuru continued, so I am assuming that the gods, or more precisely, the heavenly principles, cursed the people of Kyanria with immortality and transformed them into monsters, ensuring that their souls, or rather, their information, would never reach Irminsul. This way, the abyssal corruption was contained, preventing a catastrophic collapse of Teyvat's system. Dainsleif, after a brief moment of contemplation, nodded slowly. That could very well be the case. However, Rimuru narrowed his eyes. But something still doesn't make sense. If the only goal was to stop the corruption from spreading, then why did the curse turn people into monsters? Why not simply grant them immortality without deforming them? If what you say is true, that the gods were the ones who did this, then it becomes suspicious. There is something more at play here. Ether, still digesting everything, then asked, but what does this have to do with the loom of fate? Rimuru smirked slightly, as if he had just figured something out. That's what I was getting to. Think about it. If Irminsul is where Celestia binds people's fate, then Kyanrians, who were severed from Irminsul, essentially lost their place in fate itself. They became beings who exist outside of Teyvat's natural order. Paimon blinked. Okay. But what are you trying to say? Rimuru's expression turned serious. What I am trying to say is, the Abyss Order is most likely trying to create an alternative to Irminsul. A new system that can store the souls of Kyanrians and give them a place in fate once more. In other words, they are trying to build a new loom of fate that serves as their own Irminsul, independent of Celestia. As he said this, everyone went silent. Ether's eyes widened as he slowly connected the dots. Wait, so you're saying that instead of trying to destroy fate itself, they're trying to create their own? Rimuru nodded. Exactly. Since they can never return to Teyvat's system, they are trying to build their own version of it, one where they belong. That's why they are using the Eye of the First Field Tiller. It must play a crucial role in this process. Dainsleif's eyes narrowed as he considered Rimuru's words. That is a rather fascinating theory. If it is true, then the Abyss Order's goals are not as straightforward as simple revenge against the gods. Paimon, on the other hand, had a completely different reaction. She floated around Rimuru with an incredulous expression. Hold on. How do you even think of all this stuff? This is way too complicated. How does your brain even work? Rimuru chuckled and shrugged. Simple. I gather all the available information, analyze it, and come to the most logical conclusion. Ether crossed his arms and gave Rimuru an amused look. I think that's putting it quite lightly. You just deduced an entire hidden objective of the Abyss Order based on scraps of information. Dainsleif smirked slightly. Indeed, you have a remarkable way of thinking. Rimuru rubbed the back of his head. Well, you can say that, I guess. Still, his expression quickly turned serious again. But if my theory is right, then the Abyss Order might already be further along in their plans than we realize. We need to find out what they're really up to, and more importantly. His golden eyes glowed slightly as he spoke. We need to stop them before they succeed. Dainsleif nodded. Agreed. Let us move forward and uncover the truth. As the group continued deeper into the ruins, they eventually arrived at a more open space where a dim, eerie light illuminated the area. The surroundings were littered with broken barrels, shattered crates, and remnants of makeshift camps, all clear indicators that hilichurls had been frequenting this place. The faint sound of dripping water echoed through the cavern, adding to the mysterious atmosphere. Paimon floated ahead, looking around cautiously before pointing at the scattered objects. Hey, look, there are signs of hilichurl activity here, she exclaimed, her voice filled with both curiosity and concern. Dainsleif nodded as he surveyed the area. Indeed, it seems they have been gathering here for some reason. As the others examined the surroundings, Rimuru's attention was drawn to something above them. His golden eyes narrowed slightly as he focused on the massive, inverted ruins hanging from the cavern ceiling, an entire city turned upside down, as if gravity had forsaken it. A strange sensation pulsed through his body, something faint yet distinct. There's something different about that place, Rimuru muttered, his gaze fixed on the ruins above. Hearing his words, Paimon turned to him with curiosity. What do you mean? Did you sense something? Is it more hilichurls? Rimuru shook his head. No, it's something else. The presence here is different. It doesn't feel abyssal, nor does it feel like the lingering resentment of the fallen. It's faint, but I can sense traces of a purifying energy coming from there. Dainsleif's eyes flickered with interest. A purifying energy, you say? He turned to look at the ruins, as if reconsidering the nature of this place. After a brief pause, he nodded. That makes sense. What you are sensing may be the same force that is weakening the curse in this area. At his words, Ether, Paimon, and Rimuru all turned to look at him in surprise. Wait, this place is weakening the curse? Ether asked, his tone filled with intrigue. Dainsleif nodded. Yes, it is faint, but the curse's influence here is notably weaker than in other parts of the abyssal depths. If Rimuru is detecting a purification device, then that is most likely the cause. Rimuru crossed his arms as he considered this. That would explain why the miners reported increased hilichral activity here. If this place brings them comfort, then naturally, they would be drawn to it. Dainsleif nodded. That would align with what I know. The hilichurls, or rather, the cursed remnants of Kyanrians, may instinctively seek places where their suffering is eased, even if only slightly. Hearing this, Paimon furrowed her brows. So, this place offers them some sort of relief. That's kind of sad when you think about it. Dainsleif then turned his attention back to Rimuru and Ether. I assume you all came here as part of a commission. Ether and Rimuru nodded in confirmation. Dainsleif let out a quiet hum. That explains why you are investigating this area. However, from my knowledge, the Abyss Order does not possess the technology to create something like this. Rimuru's eyes gleamed with curiosity. Then that means this purification device must be a remnant of the old civilization that once existed here before its destruction. Dainsleif nodded in agreement. That is highly likely. Rimuru let out a small chuckle. Honestly, I'm impressed. To think that a civilization from the past had the technology to weaken the effects of a divine curse. That's no small feat. Dainsleif's expression remained serious as he added, indeed. For those who suffer under the curse of immortality, even the slightest relief is a blessing. Rimuru's gaze sharpened as he considered something. This curse, you call it the curse of immortality, but did they truly never die? Dainsleif shook his head. It is not as simple as them being unable to die. Rather, the curse erodes both body and soul over time, gradually reducing its victims to nothingness. Their existence fades, piece by piece, until eventually, they cease to be. Paimon gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. Wait, so that means there is a way to undo the curse? She asked, her voice hopeful. Dainsleif's expression darkened slightly. No, we cannot undo the curse. The process cannot be reversed once it begins. Instead, as the cursed individuals reach the end of their existence, they instinctively seek out dark, quiet places in the world, places where they can rest undisturbed. In those final moments, they simply fade away, leaving no trace behind. Paimon's wings drooped, her voice filled with sadness. That's so heartbreaking. They don't even get a proper end. Rimuru nodded, a hint of sympathy in his expression. If only I didn't have this seal restricting me, I could probably do something about it. He clenched his fist slightly, a rare sign of frustration. Dainsleif observed Rimuru's reaction with curiosity before nodding. Your insight is correct. The curse not only erodes the body and soul but also distorts the mind, turning those afflicted into the creatures we see today. If there were a way to prevent that, it would grant them at least some peace. Rimuru took a deep breath, regaining his composure. If I could just unlock this seal of mine somehow, I might be able to help them. Ether and Paimon both nodded in agreement. Yeah, Paimon said with determination. If you could help them, even a little, it would be worth it. Rimuru smiled slightly before looking back at the ruins above. His golden eyes reflected the mysterious glow of the cavern. Then I suppose it's time we uncover the secrets of this place. If that purification device is still active, we might be able to learn something from it. Dainsleif nodded. Agreed. Let's move forward. As the group continued deeper into the ruins, the air grew heavier, laced with a faint abyssal energy that made the environment feel eerily oppressive. The remnants of a civilization long forgotten lay scattered before them, broken pillars, shattered pathways, and crumbling stone structures that had been abandoned for centuries. Eventually, they arrived at what seemed to be a massive bridge, or at least what remained of one. Large portions of it had collapsed into the abyss below, leaving gaps in the structure. Though damaged, the bridge was still passable. However, a dense veil of abyssal energy pulsed along the path, blocking their way forward. The dark mist churned and crackled ominously, forming a barrier that radiated an unsettling presence. Paimon furrowed her brows as she hovered in place. Ah, just when we thought we were making progress. How do we get across now? Ether scanned the surroundings, his golden eyes narrowing. It looks like we'll need to find a device or mechanism to dispel the abyssal energy. Just as they were about to start looking, Dainsleif took a step forward. Don't waste your time. Without another word, he raised his hand, and a faint golden glow enveloped his palm. The abyssal energy shuddered violently as if resisting his presence, but within moments, it began to recede. The dark mist unraveled, its form dissipating like shadows retreating from the light. In just a few seconds, the once imposing barrier was completely gone, allowing them to cross. Rimuru, who had been watching closely, let out a low whistle. Huh, that's convenient. He turned to Dainsleif with an intrigued expression. You should teach me that technique when you have some free time. Dainsleif merely gave him a flat look before responding, I don't believe I will ever have free time. Rimuru sighed dramatically. Figures. Well, whatever, let's keep moving. With the path now clear, the group cautiously made their way across the bridge. The structure groaned slightly under their weight, but it held firm. As they reached the other side, they found themselves at the entrance of an upside-down city. The sight before them was surreal, the ruins of an ancient civilization suspended in the air upside down, defying logic and gravity. Towering structures hung from the cavern ceiling like the remains of a world that had been forcibly overturned. Dim light sources flickered from broken windows, and the sound of shifting debris echoed through the space. As they stepped inside, Rimuru suddenly halted, his sharp gaze locking onto a group ahead. Wait, look over there. The others followed his line of sight and spotted a cluster of armored figures standing in the distance. Their dark, metallic armor shimmered under the faint light, their movements stiff and unnatural. Ether tensed. Abyss creatures. Dainsleif narrowed his eyes. No, these are different. Paimon hovered closer, squinting. Wait a second, those are Black Serpent Knights, Dainsleif confirmed grimly. Once members of the Royal Guard of Kyanria. Curious, Rimuru extended his senses further, and what he discovered made his eyes widen slightly. Wait, they're not just standing guard. They're protecting hilichurls. Hearing this, everyone turned back to look more closely. Sure enough, among the armored figures were several hilichurls, huddled together. Some were resting against broken pillars, while others stood idly, their movements sluggish and weak. Yet, despite their deteriorating state, the Black Serpent Knights stood in formation around them, shielding them as if guarding precious treasure. Paimon's eyes widened in shock. What the? Why are they protecting the hilichurls? Aren't they supposed to be mindless monsters? Rimuru crossed his arms, deep in thought. No, they must still be following old orders. Dainsleif remained silent for a moment before finally speaking. Yes, that seems to be the case. Rimuru turned toward him with a questioning look. And what orders were those? Dainsleif's expression darkened slightly. When the abyssal power leaked out, and when the gods descended upon Kyanria, I gave them a direct order, to protect the people of Kyanria. At his words, everyone turned to him in shock. Rimuru blinked, processing the revelation. Wait, so you're telling me that these guys are still following your orders after all this time? Dainsleif nodded solemnly. Yes, they were once my men, part of my troops. And now, even in their corrupted state, they have not abandoned their duty. Paimon stared at him in disbelief before whispering, then, that means they were your friends. Dainsleif closed his eyes for a brief moment before letting out a quiet sigh. Yes, but now, the abyssal corruption has consumed them completely. They are no longer the people I once knew. His gaze hardened, which is why we don't have to hold back. Hearing this, Ether turned slightly toward Rimuru, as if about to say something, but he hesitated. Rimuru noticed the subtle movement and met Ether's gaze. Even though Ether said nothing, Rimuru instantly understood what he was thinking. There was an unspoken question lingering between them. You can save them, can't you? Rimuru's expression remained neutral, but the look in his eyes was clear. Don't say anything. Not now. Ether held his gaze for a moment before looking away, but the thought continued to weigh on his mind. Why? Why won't he say anything? Before Ether could dwell on it further, the Black Serpent Knights suddenly stirred, gripping their weapons. Their movements were stiff, yet there was a lingering trace of discipline in the way they positioned themselves. They were prepared to fight. They're moving, Paimon yelped, preparing to back away. But just as it seemed like battle was about to break out, the knights suddenly stopped. Their weapons remained drawn, yet they did not attack. It was as if something had given them pause. Confused, Paimon glanced at the others. What just happened? Why did they stop? Dainsleif, however, did not seem surprised. Instead, he lifted his gaze and pointed toward a higher ledge. Look over there. The group followed his direction and saw another Black Serpent Knight standing apart from the others. Unlike the rest, his armor bore slight differences, subtle engravings, a more refined structure. But the most striking difference was in his posture. Unlike the others, whose movements were stiff and corrupted, this knight carried himself with a sense of awareness. Rimuru's eyes narrowed. Wait, this one is still conscious. Dainsleif observed the knight carefully before muttering a name. Halfdan. Everyone turned toward him in surprise. Rimuru raised an eyebrow. So, he's someone you know. Dainsleif nodded. Yes, he was one of my closest subordinates. As if recognizing them, Halfdan took a step back, and the other Black Serpent Knights, who had nearly attacked, also backed away. Paimon's mouth fell open slightly. Wait, they stopped. Did that Halfdan guy do that? Rimuru rubbed his chin. Highly likely. He still has some level of reasoning left. Dainsleif observed Halfdan carefully before making a decision. Let's follow him. I believe he wants to show us something. Without hesitation, Halfdan turned and began walking away into the depths of the inverted city. The group exchanged glances before silently agreeing to follow. As they trailed behind Halfdan, a question lingered in Rimuru's mind. How much of him is still human? And more importantly, what does he want to show us?